Are you all able to see my screen? I'm sharing the presentation. Okay, excellent. Well, while we wait for a few more to join us, because we had a large number of people that RSVP'd, and I see they're jumping on. We had a large number of people that RSVP'd that said that they could make it, and we had some people that requested the recording after. So we will be recording, and I am going to go ahead and get started. Everyone can see my PowerPoint? Okay, excellent. If you wouldn't mind just to put yourselves on mute, and I'll go ahead and begin. First of all, I want to thank you so much for taking some time on a Wednesday for a really challenging conversation. We are delighted to have you here. There are experts in the field here. And so after the presentation, I invite you all to stick around and share some feedback and some insights and other questions that you might have. This presentation today, Demand Reduction Possibilities in North Carolina, where we are as a state and where we can go, really grew from a conversation between three different organizations: Shield North Carolina, NC Stop Human Trafficking, and Legacy of Hope International. We just asked really simple questions. What can we do to further demand reduction for our own agencies? And those conversations led to questions. And here are some of the questions that I had. What are the differences between a sex offender and a buyer in the context of human trafficking? What does the data actually say about pornography? What are recidivism rates after arrests? Do buyers simply not understand that what they are buying is not consensual? Would that knowledge even help change behavior? What predicts buying so that we can be better at prevention? Is it lack of connection, mental illness, untreated trauma, or just cultural beliefs? And how can we prevent it and advocate for restorative justice for offenders who do want to change? And the pressing question, as more organizations are expressing a desire to address demand, what are the best practices and policies? And is it possible that some approaches to demand reduction can actually increase buying behaviors and do more harm? The issue of combating demand is complex. It is messy. And to be honest, combating demand is a pioneering effort with very few concrete answers on exactly how to do it. But now is the time for us to have these hard conversations and explore evidence-informed strategies as stakeholders to lead the state before ill-informed strategies continue to pop up across North Carolina. And to be innovative in our approaches to combating human trafficking as the pandemic has only complicated this movement and its increased vulnerabilities for exploitation. If trafficking does increase, we need to meet it with more innovative solutions and increased capacity to do so. Today is an overview. It is a 30,000-foot view of where we are in demand reduction and an invitation to do more together. We're looking forward to hearing from you and you sharing your knowledge about demand reduction with this group as well. Oops. Our sincere appreciation to those who are joining us today to share their expertise, as well as those who were behind the scenes and made this presentation happen. Specifically, Christy Hurt, Margolis Healy, Jody Waba, Melinda Sampson, and John Pulley. Thank you so much for your contributions. I'm Nicole Bernard. I am the founder and director of Shield North Carolina. I've been in the anti-trafficking movement for about a decade now. Combating trafficking was originally posed to me it was framed using an economic model of supply and demand. It may have been the same for you. But over the years, I have noticed a disproportionate focus on supply. Reducing vulnerabilities that can put individuals at risk of exploitation has really received the focus. It's necessary, worthy work, but it's only half of the equation. There are fewer traffickers than there are victims, and there are significantly more buyers than there are survivors. And why do we empower a very vulnerable individual with ways that he or she can discern a potentially dangerous situation, but then neglect to address potential buyers? Or we simply tell them that porn is bad. Is that enough? Why aren't we putting more resources towards the many people who are driving the industry? Over the years, I have come to the realization that there are a few reasons why, from my perspective, we don't address demand as much as we do supply. The first one is what I call the invisible buyer. Through conversations with others in this movement, I have gleaned that we tend to think of buyers as somehow being out there, not in our community. It is a faceless, vile person that lives in a basement or another community, and not someone that we may love, someone we may go to work with, or coaches our children, or sits with us in a church pew. Also, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act really laid a foundation for anti-trafficking work, but it doesn't really frame prevention in terms of reducing demand as well. We want this movement to be survivor-led and survivor-centered, and that is undeniably a good thing. But we also need to keep our eye on both sides of the equation to be fully effective. Also, in the NGO world, the anti-trafficking movement is disproportionately led by women. We may be in less touch with demand, which is disproportionately male. And finally, plain old sexism. I have heard firsthand excuses for not wanting to hold buyers fully accountable, or other people have downplayed buyers' role in trafficking. So let's back up and take a global look, literally a global look. What does anti-demand look like across the globe? Well, when we look at the TIP report, we can see that in this very lengthy report, which is 570 pages, that the terms can give us a clue as to where the focus is. Victim or survivor is used more than 11,000 times, but buyer is only identified 3 times, in spite of the fact that the TIP report actually does assess demand reduction initiatives in all of the countries that it looks at. And only about 22% of the countries evaluated for the TIP report across the world included some initiative for demand reduction, but none of them included treatment for buyers. About half were awareness alone, and the other half implemented policy and prosecutions. But do we know that this is effective? Also, there could be really problematic strategies, using Rwanda as an example, which reported that their demand reduction efforts were primarily arresting sex workers, which is just riddled with issues. And according to Demand Abolition, only about 6% of the buyers in the United States have ever been arrested. And that is the only thing that the United States included on the TIP report in terms of our demand reduction initiatives. Let's look at the state level. Even how we report for the states doesn't include buyer data. We include victims identified, traffickers identified, and types of trafficking businesses, but we don't include any kind of data on buyers. Also, our language really helps frame things. We talk about buyers or Johns, but we don't say perpetrators. We talk about purchase, but not rape. In highlights for news articles, we might see something like trafficking survivor was bought more than 10 times a night in our community, which is very passive, rather than putting the onus on the buyer by saying more than 10 people in our community paid to rape a survivor. And we ask questions like, are there human trafficking victims in our town, but not, are there people in our town who are raping victims? So today we're going to give an overview. We're going to explain why demand reduction is so important, what it looks like in our state, and how we can make a difference. So first, let's look at who is buying. Well, the data is really hard to come by, first of all. But Demand Abolition, a nonprofit, has collected this from a survey of over 8,000 men. And they found from their limited survey that 6.2 of their survey responders said that they had bought sex in the last year, and 20% had bought sex in their lifetime. Now, what that means is that the majority of men are not purchasing sex. But when we look at this in the context of human trafficking, we find even further that of that 6.2%, 25% were such frequent, active, compulsive buyers that they were driving nearly 75% of market transactions. We know that buyers, like human trafficking victims, come from all races, all socioeconomic statuses, and sexual preference was not a predictor, but they were predominantly male. And we know that high-frequency buyers are more likely to make $100,000 a year. So let's translate that to North Carolina. If that demand abolition statistics can be translated, we could identify that of the 6% of adult male population in North Carolina who may be purchasing sex on in the last year, that would equate to 176,194 men. If we take that number to identify who might be compulsive buyers, we're looking at 44,000 men across the state. That means that we potentially have 44,048 potential high frequency buyers in North Carolina. Now I'm going to introduce our Assistant Director, Nikki Miller.
Thanks, Nicole. So why should we reduce the demand for sexual services from trafficking persons? Because if we are serious, if we are serious about protecting vulnerable North Carolina citizens from exploitation, and I believe we are, we have to address the source of the problem. And the driving force behind sex trafficking is the demand for sale of other people. If we don't address demand, we're enabling and perpetuating the culture of tolerance, tolerating the belief that buyers are justified in purchasing sex, even from minors, because the buyer is helping the victim financially. Tolerating the idea that sexual exploitation is just two consenting individuals, therefore a victimless crime. We'd be accepting the excuse that says it's just guys being the guys taking care of their needs, or even allowing society to believe that the victims must enjoy sex with strangers since they chose to sell themselves. Buyers rarely have to face consequences that reflect the weight of their actions. Tolerance does nothing to deter potential buyers from purchasing sex from victims, and nothing to hold them accountable for the harm they cause. We also need to consider the adverse effects of buyers to their families. In a study by Demand Abolition, 1/3 of active buyers strongly agreed that they did not want to purchase sex again. Why do you think this is the case? One possible reason is they may be struggling with compulsive, unwanted sexual behaviors. An example of this from recent news is Robert Aaron Long, who said he was motivated by a sex addiction when he killed 8 Asian employees at 3 different Atlanta massage parlors. He claims that he was tortured by his sex addiction. He blamed his victims for contributing to his addiction since he regularly visited their massage businesses explicitly to engage in sex. It's reported that the night before Robert Long committed the murders, he was kicked out of his parents' home due to his sex addiction and incessant pornography viewing. Buyers' habits can also do irreparable damage to a marriage. If you want to go back one slide, Nicole, I'm still on that last slide, thanks. So yes, it can also do irreparable damage to a marriage or a career. It could separate families. We at SHIELD personally knew 2 buyers who committed suicide because of the guilt they suffered, knowing that their purchases of sex hurt people they loved. Later in this presentation, you'll hear from John Pulley, a former buyer. Luckily, when John was arrested trying to purchase sex from a minor, he was made to complete a rigorous sex offender treatment program. John's story is a success story and a testament to what can be done if proper state demand reduction programs are in place. We need a demand reduction program in place in North Carolina. Okay, now you can go to the next slide. All right, so in our efforts to help establish a successful program, we first wanted to take inventory and determine what is already being done here in North Carolina, who is doing the work, and what are the barriers for organizations who would like to get involved but haven't. So we sent out a survey to every anti-trafficking organization in North Carolina who's listed with the Human Trafficking Commission with those objectives in mind. We are pleased to receive over 50% response rate. Okay, next slide. Now here are a couple of survey question examples. Does your organization currently include demand reduction efforts? Are you planning to include demand reduction efforts in the future? We asked them to specify the demand reduction initiatives they use, and we provided a list. We wanted to know if they were not currently engaged in demand reduction, would they like to be in the future? We also asked the organization to identify perceived barriers to establishing a demand reduction program. Next slide. Before I go over the results of the survey, I want to briefly define some terms for you. You'll be getting a more detailed explanation of these in just a few minutes. But quickly, cyber patrols. During cyber patrols, an organization will post decoy ads for sex. When a would-be buyer calls in response to the ads, a trained volunteer engages the buyer in a non-threatening, mostly scripted, one-on-one conversation in which the trained volunteer explains the realities of human trafficking, informs the buyer that obtaining an individual for sexual servitude is a felony in North Carolina, and offers the caller resources for help. Next, when we talk about campaigns that use technology as a deterrence method, we are referring to those that are similar to cyber patrols, except the potential buyer doesn't speak to a live person. Instead, the potential buyers may click on a decoy ad and get a pop-up deterrence message, or they may interact with a chatbot through text messaging. That's artificial intelligence. Next, the John School and Diversion programs. These programs are for buyers who have already been arrested. The goal for these programs is to educate offenders in an effort to change their behaviors. The program may be mandated by court or offered as a diversion option, resulting in lesser penalties. So these first three approaches interact directly with the buyer or potential buyer. There are 6 organizations in North Carolina that employed at least one of these approaches. And to my knowledge, there's only one organization that currently has one of these campaigns running. A fourth demand reduction approach that more North Carolina anti-trafficking organizations choose is to provide education to the public. Educational topics that they offer that specifically address demand include the link between pornography and sex trafficking, unwanted sexual behaviors, and the potential harms of buying sex. There are 16 organizations that take the public education approach to demand reduction. So for those visual learners, if we could go to the next slide, we've plotted the 6 organizations, the location of the 6 organizations who operate programs that interact directly with the buyers or potential buyers. This slide helps to visually identify the gaps across our state. And you may notice, those detail-oriented viewers here may notice that there are only 5 dots, and that's because 2 of the organizations are in Wake County. Okay, next slide. On the next slide, we've added in the 16 organizations that provide public education regarding demand. So as you can see, there are many gaps, but it's the starting point. On a positive note, there were 14 organizations across the state that said they're not currently doing anything to address demand, but they would like to, they want to get involved. So we will have additional support across the state that we can tap into as this group moves forward. So now I'll hand it over to Pam Strickland of North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking.
Thank you, Nikki. So our next step is to think about what demand reduction might look like in North Carolina. How might we reduce demand here? And so there are several different broad categories that we're going to look at. We're going to look at awareness, education, and collaboration, policy, technology, diversion, and treatment. And my role is to talk to you about policy. So although most of our conversation today is going to be about sex trafficking, we did want to mention the issue of labor trafficking and just acknowledge that that is an issue in North Carolina and that we need at some point to have a discussion about demand reduction for labor trafficking as well. Some elements of that conversation might include educating the public about conscious consumerism, about how the way we spend our money here does impact people around the world. We might choose to encourage government entities and businesses to vet their suppliers, to be sure that their suppliers are not using forced or exploited labor. And related to that, we might choose to penalize companies that import products made by exploited people. Some of you might be familiar with the Supply Chain Transparency Act, which does that exact thing on a federal level. One criticism of that act has been that it only applies to extremely large multinational corporations. So moving now to look at sex trafficking, some of the actions that we may want to consider there would be, as Nikki mentioned, to educate the public about the relationship between pornography and sex trafficking. That in fact, pornography is just one of several different business models that is employed by sex traffickers. Another strategy might be to reduce access to pornography by minors. So currently, all of our internet service providers give us access to pretty much any websites that are out there. If we want to limit the websites that our devices have access to, then we would have to call our internet service providers and ask them to filter out as many as possible of the porn sites. And of course, you already know that this can be done because schools do it and McDonald's does it after having been sued about that issue. So that is one strategy. Another strategy might be for our internet service providers to filter out access to pornographic sites, and any adult who wanted to be able to access those sites, call their internet service provider and what we would refer to as opt-in, that they would have the ability to access the pornographic sites. The benefit to this type of policy, this strategy, is that any adult who wants access to pornography could have access, but that access to pornography by minors would be greatly reduced. This is a strategy that is being employed in the UK. Another strategy that could assist with demand reduction would be to more forcefully enforce our current laws. So we could, in fact, charge all sex buyers with sexual servitude. So in 2019, the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission asked the General Assembly to expand the definition of sexual servitude in our statute to apply to all instances of buyer conduct. So what that would mean is that someone who purchases sex would actually be charged with sexual servitude. Next slide. Here is our policy, our statute, excuse me, in North Carolina. And you can see in red that the word obtains, that's the word that was added in 2019, which makes it possible to charge a sex buyer with the crime of sexual servitude. The reason this is important, you'll see also in red here, that someone who violates this section is guilty of a Class D felony if the victim of the offense is an adult, and a Class C felony if the victim is a minor. That's important because currently the charge that sex buyers, on the somewhat rare occasions that they're charged with anything, they're being charged with solicitation of prostitution, which is a misdemeanor. So one possibility would be to more often or all the time charge a sex buyer with the felony charge so that they might take it more seriously, and so that law enforcement might also take it more seriously. Other potential policies that we could look at that have been used around the country. And I want to be clear here that as I go through several of these are policies that are being used in various jurisdictions across the country that we wanted to inform you all about. None of these are really things that our coalition is advocating that North Carolina begin to use, but we wanted you to know what the options are as we begin our discussion. So one option would be to impose serious fines on people who are convicted of buying sex. These fines could be used to fund diversion programs or to fund services for victims. An example of that is in the city of Chicago. For the first offense of purchasing sex, those buyers receive a fine of $1,000 to $1,750. And you see on subsequent offenses, it goes pretty dramatically up from there. Also, jail time and community service is in play there. Next slide. So other policies that are being used in other places. When a sex buyer solicits for prostitution from a vehicle, in some places that vehicle is impounded. In some places that person's driver's license is suspended, again, if they are soliciting from a vehicle. Another option is to have a special diversion court, similar to the drug courts that we already have in North Carolina. One that we all hear a lot about, and thanks to Nikki for explaining what a sex buyer or a John school is. And it can be a part of a diversion plan, or it can actually be part of the sentence if someone is convicted. And that generally depends upon the number of times a person has been arrested for purchasing sex. So again, it varies so much across the country what different jurisdictions refer to as a John school. In one jurisdiction, whenever a sex buyer is arrested, at that time, they show them a 15-minute video, and they call that a John school. In another jurisdiction, when the person is charged, if it's their first offense, they can elect to be diverted and to take a healthy manhood class. And then once they have completed that class, then the sex buying charge is dropped. In another jurisdiction, they're required to complete a 10-week class that includes individual and group therapy sessions. So I give you these examples just to say that it can be a diversion, it can be a part of a sentence, and the diversion program can look like a wide variety of things. There's lots of options there. Another choice is public shaming. In some jurisdictions, the mugshots of people who are charged with buying sex are printed in the paper, are published on websites, and in some cases even put on billboards. In Florida, what they have done is create a registry for convicted sex buyers. I would want to point out, if we elect to go this route of shaming, that there is a great difference between publishing a registry of people who have been convicted and publishing pictures of people who have only been charged. So I think that is something that we would merit some discussion. Next slide, please. So I imagine that all of you are familiar with sex buyer stings or John stings done by law enforcement. Another option is to add any sex buyer to the sex offender registry. And some of you may have heard of SOAP orders or stay out of areas with prostitution orders. Charlotte has done this in the past, and that can look like a couple of different things. In some cases, what law enforcement does is if they see cars in an area that is known to have a lot of prostitution, they will send a letter to the owner of that car saying, you know, we've seen this vehicle in this high prostitution area. If you get charged with buying sex, you know, here are the consequences. If you get convicted, here's what's going to happen, just to use it as a deterrent. For people who have been convicted of buying sex, part of their sentence might be that they are ordered to stay out of these areas that are known for high levels of prostitution. So related to what I was just talking about a little bit are these Dear John letters. And it can look, again, like a couple of different things. One instance is, again, when the car has been seen in a high prostitution area, they send a letter to the owner of the car. Another way that this can be used, though, is when they are web-based stings that are done by law enforcement. and individuals engage in the sting. You know, they're in there looking and thinking about buying sex, but they don't ever actually commit online, so they're not arrested, but law enforcement knows who they are. Then they can send those people letters saying, hey, we know you were in there looking around, you were considering buying sex. If you are charged with it, here's what's going to happen. If you're convicted, here's what the consequences are. So, as you can see, there are just a variety of policy options that are being used across the country, and North Carolina could consider any of them or be creative and come up with others. Again, we are not advocating that North Carolina begin to do any of these, but we wanted it to be for you all to have this knowledge as we begin this conversation of things that we might consider. So now I'm going to turn it over to Monica.
I think you're on mute, Monica.
Sorry, I gave a whole intro and thank you, to both you, Nicole, and Nikki and your team for doing this work, and first of all for inviting my dear colleague and friend, Christy Hurt, to participate in this. What I do want to mention about Christy, who isn't able to be here with you, she and I have spent the last decade looking at sex offender treatment models for the state of North Carolina. They're roughly, as you can see, right at a dozen, little over a dozen states who actually have sex offender management boards. And so again, glad to be here to talk about kind of your initial conversation or comments, Nicole, around looking at how you look at a model that already exists, like sex offender treatment and sex offender management, as a way to consider what next steps you take for addressing buyers and in North Carolina. As you can see, sex offender management has been in place for many, many years, but not a lot of states have taken that model as a model that they want to implement, including our state. So Christy Hurt and I've spent little more than a decade trying to get North Carolina to join the ranks of those states who have a sex offender management board. We felt like we were making a little headway 2 years ago with Department of Public Safety, and then COVID happened, and so it's been a little stalled. But the thing that I'll tell you about the research that we've done with these sex offender management boards is they certainly all look very different across the country. But the number one thing that we believe is important is assessing. Not all sex offenders, like, excuse me, all Johns come to this with the same background, reasons, or psychology around the harm that they're causing as sex offenders. The other piece of this research that we've found, there were several major pieces of federal legislation that govern the way that we look at sex offenders. And what we found is harsher penalties actually did not reduce recidivism. And I strongly recommend Pitt County, which was one of the counties listed as doing human trafficking work, Pam, is that your sheriff's department spent roughly about 8 to 10 years, and Dr. Rebecca Macy did the research for them on sex offender treatment and management and monitoring them. So they have a dearth of knowledge that I do believe would be helpful in your endeavors that they've collected around the efficacy and efficiency of monitoring tools, sex offender treatment policies in the state of North Carolina. And technically the outcomes were they were pretty ineffective. But again, I would also say a large part of that is because we didn't do the real work to actually assess each offender as an individual to determine what treatment models that we would recommend, but also what the criminal penalties looked like for them. And so again, Pam, you're right, in Pitt County, so I strongly recommend that they would be a partner that you would look to, as well as Dr. Rebecca Macy, who many of you are aware has done a significant amount of research, but also did the research for Pitt County Sheriff's Department. So one of the things that I will also say about a sex offender management board is exactly this. The goal of a board is a diverse group of people who have an interest in sex offender both treatment, and prevention. And so treatment is a pretty foundational approach to sexual violence, because we certainly believe that people who are perpetrators and cause harm, that there are abilities to rehabilitate and reduce recidivism for those sex offenders who fall in line with the risk management tools, which, by the way, the state of North Carolina does not use those tools, with the exception of one facility in Harnett County, which is the only facility in North Carolina that actually even has any sex offender treatment. The other thing about the state of North Carolina is we don't have sex offender treatment guidelines. And again, the thing about these 15 states that you see highlighted here, those boards have ensured that their sex offender treatment plans and models, as well as many of those are attached to the criminal legal system, so that it gives judges an outlet for treatment. So, you know, Christy and I talked, and the best recommendation, she told me to give you two, which the top one that we believe is that in order to really talk about kind of the overlap or similarities around sex offenders and those who purchase sex for human trafficking, is, are there similarities, and really digging into that before making a determination if this model works. The second piece is we certainly always welcome people to the initiative that we will continue to work on in North Carolina, which is to create a community where we're doing both risk assessment of those that cause harm, and secondly, ensuring that the treatment model or outcomes make sense for that particular offense, and not that we're given a one size fits all, because again, the research supports that does not work at all. And then I think there's one more slide. Yes. So key points in decision making around this national model, after the very long time that we've done this, is we used Colorado as a case study to look at the decision points that you see here. Again, the group of people that we worked with in the state of North Carolina are diverse and kind of fall in line with, we've worked with Department of Public Safety, we've worked with treatment providers, both those internal into facilities, meaning they work at a treatment facility that includes sex offender treatment. We've worked with the sex offender management folks at the Harnett County Prison, where the only sex offender treatment program exists in North Carolina Corrections. We had advocates, survivors, child advocacy centers, everyone that we thought would have a vested interest in this. And so many of you have seen the child sexual abuse practice model that we created, Christy Hurt, Sarah Vadrine, and myself, as a result of the Human Trafficking Commission several years ago. And that same group were listed, so their names are all inside of the document, and I'm happy to drop it in the chat. I think I have it PDF, so I'll try to drop it in the chat. And if I can't find it, I'll resend it to you, Nicole, so that you can share with all the participants. But that document took this case study into consideration as one of two of the key points that we include are, we do believe that North Carolina, that reducing and addressing child sexual abuse in the many forms is a prevention method for human trafficking. And then we also believe that sex offender treatment is extremely important to the change as well. And so we hope that by using the Colorado case study and all the details that we can share with you all as you consider to explore this, how you address this in North Carolina, that we can use the resources and the people, as well as the data that we've collected as a result of that. I think that is my last slide.
Thank you so much, Monica. That is, you are certainly a leader and an expert in this. And so thank you so much for sharing all those many years of work. Thank you. I'm going to highlight some technology that has been used in other areas. Nikki's already mentioned chatbots, cyber patrols, and deterrence messaging. This has been used to increase capacity, and it's been used outside of the state in other areas. Excuse me 1 second. Let me first draw your attention to the fact that there are what are called CEASE cities. There are cities empowered against sexual exploitation. They exist around the country. As part of being a CEASE city, they have groups similar to what we're doing today that meet much like a collaboration or a coalition, alliance, or a task force. They meet regularly. They're multidisciplinary. They include representatives of the cyber patrols. They include policy advocates, prosecutors, treatment providers, and law enforcement. They resource share and share information about the scope and the trends that they're seeing in demand. They also put a lot of focus on awareness and education, especially around interpersonal violence prevention, education on unwanted sexual behavior, and they reframe anti-trafficking work by putting the emphasis on the buyer. Chatbots, as mentioned previously, are essentially it's technology in which a decoy ad is placed on a site that's being known to promote the solicitation of sex, and a deterrence message is sent when somebody interacts with that number. In some of these chatbots, they're actually interacting with artificial intelligence. This has become, some of the buyers have caught on to this, and it's become a bit trickier, but there are certain really key advantages to using a chatbot. First of all, it's relatively inexpensive. The code has already been written, and that is shareable from other states. And one state has offered, has offered, they still need to sign off on it by the person in charge, but that's potentially shareable. It can reach a wide audience. So whereas if there's a reverse operation led by law enforcement in which they have an agent who is interacting with the potential buyer, that can only be one-on-one, this can reach a capacity of 300 people at the same time interacting with the same ad. It can also be deployed during times of higher activity, such as in times of a sporting event when they know that there may be more exchanges or transactions. And in some cases, they can be used to assist operations, thereby increasing the capacity of law enforcement. But one of the kind of the starting point for demand reduction can be, a chatbot can be used for a starting point. Just what are the trends? How many people in an area are actually making purchases or attempting to make purchases? And which ads are they responding to more? Are they responding more to children, more to men, more to certain demographics of the potential person being sold? And so it can kind of give a read of the demand in a certain area. Also, there are cyber patrols. As Nikki mentioned, this is kind of like a chat bot, but it is with actual people. And so you have 12 men who are trained, they're selected to be the right fit for this kind of initiative. They meet and they actually themselves interact with potential buyers. So a decoy ad is placed, a potential buyer makes a call, and they're interacting with a live person who is giving them resources. So it's very restorative minded. It also can be used to inform law enforcement as well. Epic, who has done this, reports that since 2012, that 178,000 attempts to purchase sex were made during that time. Oh, and I will also say that we have one group in our area that is in the initial conversation of starting one in the Apex area. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Dean Duncan.
Actually, Nicole, this is Nancy. You can't. Dean just texted me and said he's lost internet connection, and he asked me to let you know that, and he's trying to get on with a hotspot, so he apologizes.
No problem. Well, I was actually the representative from NCCAT on this project, so I can at least give an overview and we can back up if he's able to jump back on. So somebody please flag me if they see Dean come back on. Essentially what this project was, what are you searching for, was started originally in the Fayetteville area. They used decoy ads. They put advertisements in Fayetteville for the original project that it included messages that were like, what would your mother say about this? What would your spouse say about this? And because it was in the Fayetteville area, they also included things like, what would your drill sergeant say about this? And so it's really to raise consciousness of the fact that the behavior of a potential buyer could be shameful if somebody else that they loved found out about it. Then they launched the same project essentially in the Wake County area, and they really reframed it to be less shame driven and much more restorative justice minded, which was asking the hard question of what are you really searching for? Why are you trying to make this purchase in the first place? Is it because of disconnection? Is it loneliness? And we know from the Cyber Patrol data that that's typically the case, that these are people who may not recognize what they're doing is harmful and they're doing it to fill another need. And so I'm going to skip through some of the data, but suffice it to say that this campaign using geofencing, where they were able to identify based on law enforcement's direction, where there were areas where people might be more likely to purchase sex, those people got these messages.
And Nicole, he's back on.
Okay, great. I gave a quick introduction, Dean.
Great. I've never had, and over the last year, this has never happened when I was scheduled to go on and then.
Oh no. Oh no. Well, poor Dean. Let's go ahead and skip through this. I will say I can give you a spoiler alert. This project worked. The click-through rate was higher than it was in other industries. These are a couple of the displays that the men would get, or the potential buyers, and you can see that they're not shaming. The messages is not shaming, it's empowering, it's compassionate. And I want to introduce, I'm going to skip through this and we can try and go back if Dean is able to come back on, but I'm going to introduce Anna Marie, who can tell us a little bit about A Call to Men, which is where the advertisement's connected back to.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you all so much for including A Call to Men in today's conversation, and to our other partners in the What Are You Searching For campaign, Gloria Stallworth, Dean, of course, Liz Klein, and their respective teams. And I was so happy to see Monica on here, who is like a Call to Men family. So we're grateful to be among this wonderful group today. So I'm just going to give y'all a quick overview of the work of A Call to Men to show how we approached our partnership in part in this campaign. We educate men and boys all over the world on what we call healthy, respectful manhood. Now, I noticed that in Pam's presentation, she noted that there are healthy manhood classes that are in John schools, and we have nothing to do with those. So just so you know that there's no connection there. But we do educate men and boys all over the world on healthy, respectful manhood. And we do that because we know that embracing and promoting a healthy, respectful manhood will prevent all forms of gender-based violence and discrimination, and promote a culture that is equitable and inclusive. We're a violence prevention organization. That's where we got our start. We've been doing this work for 20 years, and we've really led the national discussion on issues of manhood, male socialization and its intersection with violence, and preventing violence against all women and girls and those in the margins of the margins. All of our work in education, and we do this, we like to say, from the barbershop to the boardroom, is really centered on our signature analysis. And our founder, Tony Porter, coined the term the man box to illustrate the collective socialization of men. And the man box really identifies the limitations on what a man is supposed to be and what he believes. And we know that these expectations are taught to men and our boys, sometimes unconsciously, but they're reinforced all throughout society: media, messaging, billboards, magazines, television, music, all over the place. And in our interactions with our boys from a very young age. So in the man box, men are supposed to be powerful and dominating and fearless and in control and strong and emotionless and successful. And the flip side of that is that women are objects, they're property, and they have less value than men. And those teachings are what allows gender-based violence to persist, and it really lays a foundation for trafficking of women and girls and those in the margins of the margins. And that's really how we approach this issue. We want to address demand reduction from a prevention standpoint. Through innovative campaigns like What Are You Searching For? We hope to reach men with a disruptive message that makes them think beyond that surface level interaction. We do this by offering an invitation to men and not an indictment of their manhood. That was really the shift that we brought to the What Are You Searching For campaign, the shift away from that shame-based messaging to, one that really elevates their own critical thinking. So we let men and boys know that their ideas about manhood and women and girls have been shaped by that collective socialization, and that the messages that the media and culture bombard us all with are telling us that women are property or objects and that they have less value than men. And at A Call to Men, we see our job is really to raise men and boys' consciousness about their collective socialization so they can think critically about how they're reinforcing or passing on these really harmful beliefs, and so they can challenge them in other men and boys. And we offer, a new way forward, and we call that healthy manhood. The principles of healthy manhood include things like embracing and expressing a full range of emotion, not conforming to the pressure to always be fearless and in control, to value a woman's life, to treat all people equally, to promote the betterment of humanity, not using language that denigrates women and girls, and really developing an interest in the experience of women and girls outside of sexual conquest. Those are just a couple of the things that we think of when we talk about healthy manhood. And the outcome is that, we know that when we increase and promote a healthy, respectful manhood, we're going to decrease and prevent all forms of gender-based violence and discrimination. And healthy manhood is also we've got tons of data that links it to improved physical and mental health and emotional well-being for men. So it's a win-win, and it's a path to meaningful equity in our society. And our work is really intentionally designed to affect the 5 pillars on the slide that you're looking at: preventing violence against all women and girls, equity for marginalized communities, improving men's mental health outcomes, healthy relationships for young people, and creating equitable workplaces. So we're super grateful to be part of the discussion today. And back to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Yes, A Call to Men is truly remarkable. And in raising young boys myself, I can say that I have really gleaned a lot of wisdom in how to be a better mom to them. I'm looking now for Dean. Has anybody seen Dean on here? Dean, are you here? I saw him and then he disappeared. Poor Dean. Okay, well, we are going to have to move along. Let me move down to the next one. And if he's able to jump back in, perhaps we can go back and review that data, which was very impressive. I'm now going to hand it over to Bren.
Hi, pleasure to be here. I am the CEO with Legacy of Hope International. Had the honor of working with NC Shield and NC Stop Trafficking and everyone involved in this and learning through them. I got involved with demand reduction through doing human trafficking prevention more years ago, personally, through doing outreaches just on domestic violence and trying to prevent that. And at a year early in the fight, I realized that this is my family. These are my friends. They're people. And why aren't we talking to them just like we're talking to the women? And so that's where my passion began. I stepped into the CEO position of Legacy of Hope International about 2.5, 3 years ago, was working with volunteer with them. So fast forward a little bit, years later, after moving to North Carolina, I started looking around from the different states that I had lived in. I was like, what is going on? I don't see a whole lot of fighting the demand, ending the demand side of things when it comes to demand reduction or diversion programs, and just started on my own doing some informal research and reading. Stumbled across John Pulley, and then stumbled across the Texas Council of Sex Offender and Treatment. And from other things that I had read, it seemed like it was really, from a research perspective, what could potentially work the best. So you'll just see there, it's a quick overview of one of the things that we're talking about that could be one of the things that North Carolina might want to consider in this conversation. And then after this slide, we'll have John's perspective on his experience. So as you can see, it's been in existence since 1983. They work specifically with contract licensed therapists. The therapists are based on, they're specifically providing long-term therapy, which I think we can all agree from different things that we've shared today and those who have been doing this for a while. It provides accountability through individual sessions as well as group. As you can see there, the other things from even talking with John that he pointed out, and will point out, I think, even in the video, that's important to take note of, is that this also provides with probation officers more resources to help offenders that are serious about getting help, not just, for good behavior. We're also looking at, the things that they addressed through this is they really have to stop and address things like thinking errors, victim blaming, redirection. It really hits to the core and heart of what kind of we were talking about earlier. And even Monica, I'm very excited about reading your research, and even with the demand reduction of the different chat bots and things like that that are out there, that they have found that it's a program that is really making a difference. It took John, as an example, 10 years before he was really released, and to be able to move forward, and he can share more about that.
I'm just going to ask everybody to take their video off for a second while we play this video. I found that seems to help the technology run a little bit more seamlessly. I'm going to stop my video. Having a little difficulty with this video playing. Bryn, would you be able to share the video in the chat?
I can, or if John would like to just maybe wing it while I'm trying to pull it up, we can do that as well. Nothing like being put on the spot.
Well, I can certainly do that if you'd prefer. Yeah, so my name is John Pulley, and I got the opportunity to go through the program in Texas, and it was one of those things that I never dreamed I would end up doing. I mean, I was a person that had, grew up with a normal upbringing, had a dad that always wanted me to be, better than he was. So he always challenged me, and I grew up with a lot of insecurities, things like, I got 7 A's and 1 B at school. Why did you get a B? If you'd have studied harder, you could have done this. And I think what I really took home from that was what I took away from that childhood and that upbringing was it was a subtle understanding that I just wasn't good enough. And I think for me, that got carried into adulthood. I had insecurities about who I was, insecurities about, the person that I am, the way that I approach things. And I always had this fear that I was going to be found out. Somebody's going to find out that I'm not good enough. And that transitioned into relationships. Well, for me, I got into my 20s. I mean, I remember the first time I saw pornography was when I was, younger, probably, I say younger, to today's day and age is relative, but it was probably around 13 or 14. And it wasn't a big deal for me. However, I ended up through a series of circumstances, my roommate had called a bunch of phone numbers and called 800 numbers, and he had called teenage lines. This is in college. He had called teenage lines and talked to teenagers sexually. And he came out and admitted it. And 6 months later, he decided to leave town, and we ended up calling a bunch of those numbers to find out what they were, which for me, as a person that had never really been into pornography, it was strange to me that I listened to one of those phone calls and it really turned me on, right? I mean, and that began a journey of about 10 years of pornography addiction that turned into a sex addiction. I ended up getting married, things with my wife, they were fine. We were cordial, but we wrestled as anyone that has insecurities would. But I think what ended up happening was, and there's me on screen. If you want me to be quiet and show the video, you're welcome to, or I can keep going. Y'all just let me know.
I'm going to go ahead. That was a great introduction. Thank you so much, John. I'm going to go ahead and play the movie. if it will play.
What if there was a potential?
Oop, that's not it. No, John, if you can just keep going, that would be great.
For me, the addiction just it grew, and my sex addiction grew more out of not feeling confident in myself, not feeling confident in my marriage. But the thing I think is important is that at the time that my sex addiction was growing, I lived in a suburb of North Dallas. My wife was on the fast track to becoming a partner at a law firm in downtown Dallas. All of these things were going on, and I think that the thing I want to say is I was a normal guy on the outside. Everything on the outside looked fine. You know, I'm making $120,000 a year, married to an attorney, but for me, I look back and my addiction took me. You know, I as is true of any addiction, you need more and more to get the same dopamine hit. And for me, I ended up getting arrested the first time that I had gone. I mean, at this point, I had gone to prostituted women, I had gone to strip clubs, I had gone to massage parlors, I'd done all of that, but it wasn't exciting enough. I needed more, and I was driven by my own personal insecurities and my own need to feel good. And even though I knew it didn't work long term, that was a short term for me. But I look back, I started going to younger and younger people. You know, I started out with 30s, 25, 21, 18. And fortunately for me, the first time that I went after someone that was a teenager, they were 15, online is what their profile said. It was a police sting, and I got arrested. What I think is important about my story is a couple of different things. One, I was a normal guy. I made 6 figures, married to an attorney. On the outside, everything looked normal. There was nothing that you would have known that I had an addiction, because I didn't tell anybody because I was ashamed. I didn't want anyone hating me. Mine went to a sex addiction and took me down places. But I think it's important to know people are not born going after children. They're born with regular dreams and regular life. Somehow or another, the insecurities, the traumas, the things that happen in life lead you through a path that gets you there. Now, does that mean there doesn't need to be consequences? Absolutely not. Justice has to be served, and there are rules that need to be put in place. But because the state of Texas took me in and forced me to go through this treatment, I was forced for the first time to deal with my issues. Like if they had just given me probation and said, okay, take probation, go to a one-day school or watch a 15-minute video, nothing would have changed. And I look at the shame that is used through promoting, you know, putting their names on billboards, publishing names, doing all this stuff. That's fine if it's just that person, but there are wives involved, and there are children that go to school that are involved. And if you want to shame someone for the rest of their life and throw them back into isolation, the isolation is the very thing that drove them to do the behaviors that they had in the first place. So putting someone in a place where they can actually face what they did with someone guiding them through the process to go, you realize your thinking is so messed up. It wasn't that you're a horrible person. Your thinking is messed up and your choices are bad, but let's work on that. And over the course of 10 years, I had to write a letter to my victim. Again, my victim was online, but I had to write a letter that was recognizing what I was doing to them and how they felt. And inside of this, yes, I am a registered sex offender and I do speak about this, but I also got the opportunity a few years back to speak at a conference and tell my story at a anti-human trafficking conference. And what's happened out of that is I now work at Fierce Freedom in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is an anti-human trafficking organization that, you know, we're fighting for education. I work on the demand side of things. I speak about the connection between pornography and human trafficking. I speak about the dangers of human trafficking. And for me, I try to draw the connection between all the things that look like normal things, massage parlors, strip clubs, that people say normal, boys will be boys, and try to draw that connection between them that I never got, which is this is actually slavery, and I'm actually participating in slavery because I love, and the last thing I'll say is I love what they just said about healthy manhood. We didn't try to shame people. We tried to speak to men in a way that told them what they really want. Men don't want to be evil people. And you're not going to change people by locking, throwing them away and locking up the key. If we want to see societal change and we want to see demand stop, You've got to stop the thinking and the mentality behind this. You can't stop it by just, oh, let's throw them in jail for a while or let's hide them from everybody. So that's why I think this, and I love being a part of this. I'm honored to be a part of this, quite frankly. I hope you really look at this and find ways to go after the people, the people that are behind this. They're known as buyers, but they're just people.
John, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think you really highlight, the humanity and the pain that is often associated, that is often the pain that drives some of this behavior. And I think that it's exactly right that for some buyers, it's a 10-year process, it's treatment. And so thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And Anna Marie said in the chat as well. Thank you for sharing, John. I'm going to share my screen again. John, I will be able to share your video that you recorded previously, which was so well done. I'll be able to share that with the recording as well when we are able to, when we send that out. So just to wrap up, there are so many options. There are so many questions, but there are also so many options. And I think that this process is messy. As Monica, I just want to echo what Monica said, is that the assessment piece is so important, that every buyer is a different person. Every sex offender is a different person, and sex offender and buyer are not always the same thing. And so we have to have different strategies in our tool belt to really address this in a way that needs to be addressed. But I want to invite everyone to imagine what it would look like for North Carolina to start taking up these hard conversations and flipping the script and really start engaging with more people to implement some strategies that would work for our state and for our regions and for our municipalities. What if the agencies that exist across North Carolina that are doing prevention and awareness also are empowered to start addressing demand reduction and having conversations in a way that's healthy and promotes real change in treatment and restoration? What if we identified best practices and implemented those and addressed the issues associated with those compulsive buyers? What if North Carolina actually led other states in being able to do the same thing? What if we identified policies that really worked for addressing these issues? And how might individuals and families' lives actually change if compulsive purchasers had the opportunity to seek treatment? And how could the anti-trafficking movement be more effective by increasing capacity through the use of technology for demand reduction? I really have so much hope. I also have concerns because I have had conversations with other groups who want to do demand reduction and they're just going for it. And as we know, there can be more harm done than good in some cases. So I think it's important to get ahead of the issue and have these conversations now and start strategizing on what best practices could be. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Before you go, we have more time that we have allotted just for having a conversation around this. I actually have a survey that I would love for you to take just a few moments to also give us some feedback on. We want this to be one conversation of many. So I'm just going to put this here for you all to give some feedback. This should, copied the wrong thing. Give me one moment. Okay. If you all would just it'll take probably about 3 minutes. But really our hope is that we continue this momentum and that we're able to follow up and address any kind of concerns or provide more information on the specific things that you want information on.
Folks, we intentionally left time so that we could actually talk together about this. So we would love to know, we bombarded you with a lot of information, but do you have just any general thoughts on yes, this is something that I would like to work on, my agency would like to work on. Can you immediately think of people that we should have invited and didn't think to invite? So we just invite your engagement.
Nicole, I don't know if is Monica still on the call? I can't see her.
Monica had to leave. She put in the chat.
Oh, did she? Okay. Because I wanted to update her, and I know Nicole and Nikki, I updated you that, you know, we did have Christy Hurt come in to North Carolina Department of Public Safety, specifically Community Corrections, State Probation and Parole. And along with Suzanne Brown McBride and David Demora, they came in and did a really deep dive on our current practices, what the best practices were, and gave us a very detailed report. That was right before COVID. So Monica was correct in that, but we are steadily starting to implement some of those recommendations, and they do evolve around sex offender management board, licensing, talking with the legislature about general statute changes and things of that nature. So I just wanted to give that update from Community Corrections. And I know Nicole and Nikki, we had a great conversation several weeks back, but I wanted to let Monica know that, but that's okay. We'll connect later.
In the work that you're doing, Ms. Brewer, is it directed solely at, you know, sex offenders, or is there anything being done with buyers?
So as far as the consult that we did with Christy Hurt's group, that was specific to sex offender management, the registry, sex offender treatment, not related to demand reduction. Since that time, the department has gotten very involved with the Human Trafficking Commission that the governor has appointed many members to, and I'm actually going to be assuming a vacant position on that board. So I would think in my role as deputy director for state probation that this is, as I've told Nikki and Nicole, that this is something that we definitely want to get more involved in. We are involved with the court in Cumberland County. I believe it's Worth Court, I believe. But we do have staff involved with that specific court. So at this time, no other initiatives outside of what AOC has driven down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, but something that is now on my radar, especially with the appointment to that board and conversations with Nicole and Nikki. And we're looking at trying to do some statewide training for our probation officers. It's kind of the first piece that you discussed about education.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Are people still working on the survey, or are we ready to jump into a conversation? I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions and comments. What were some of the things that you might have found striking, surprising, concerning? What do you feel optimistic about? What did you want to launch tomorrow? What scared you about the presentation?
I know I'm optimistic to see so many people on and so many people that are involved with this, and to look over Monica's research. That was very exciting to see. And it'll be interesting to see the difference between Texas and Colorado.
And related to that, I'm going to look up the information she shared about Pitt County, and I'll make that available as well when I find that.
I'll jump in and say this was all very, very interesting. I appreciate all of the presentations, and it does seem like there's a lot to follow up on. I think the thing that stood out to me the most is how strongly I feel that it is counterproductive and not helpful to have a strategy that is shaming or that sort of further ostracizes people, both because I don't think that that helps with recidivism, but also because I think it overlooks a broader problem. And that even if we are talking about a small subset of the population, the conditions that promote people to be exploited and abused are broad societal conditions, not conditions of individual people. And so I think that my inclination is always to think broader, to think about, I really like the conversation about healthy manhood, because it's not a question of whether people are individually bad actors. There are people who have individually committed bad acts, but it's really about who we are as a people, what masculinity is. And if I think in our criminal justice system, we have a real inclination to try to put people in categories and boxes and oversimplify. And I think that's really dangerous when you're trying to make cultural change, because if you're missing the culture. And so I think that's what I would caution us against, and that we just really think about the systems and the environmental factors that play into this for everybody, even if they never buy sex or if they never, get into any trouble. It's all on a spectrum. So those are the thoughts that were percolating in my head.
Yeah, I can. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I strongly agree, Jasmine. As discussed a little bit in the beginning, when you allow for those, just the tolerance, the societal tolerance, it is a systems problem, a society problem, because even if you're not buying, you're tolerating, we're looking the other way. So thank you for pointing that out.
And from a purely practical standpoint, there's data that suggests that actually increasing shaming increases the behavior. And so we could be adding fuel to the fire if we don't address demand appropriately. Any other questions about anything that we proposed today? Any interest in being connected with outside players who might be implementing some of this technology?
This is Tara Minter. I would recommend looping in education, Department of Public Instruction here in North Carolina, since they're currently pushing the need to have human trafficking education of its staff, schools, K through 12, and also the kids. Maybe there's a way to engage them on this end, bringing awareness, especially since not all buyers are coming from a certain place. They're the range. So maybe they could, that is in a system that we could interact with to see if it's possible to bring some awareness about this particular issue, the demand reduction and what that looks like.
Thanks, Tiara. That's a great idea.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, because you think about familial trafficking, and I think Polaris said that's like 41%. They've got the research to prove that now. And you look at intimate partners, and then you think about the perspective of it is our family, it is our friends, it is our neighbors, it's the teachers, it's anyone that could be needing that help to not be part of the demand side, and realizing that there's help out there. And then if we hit it from this perspective, I think that could make a big difference.
I just want to clarify real quick, Tara, when you mentioned looping in DPI, are you talking about adding in kind of a healthy manhood piece to the curriculum that's already being taught in schools, or are you interested? Was your idea to create something new, or to just get their opinion?
Well, definitely a healthy man could stance might be easier to get into because the school system might be hesitant about anything else, but from there, maybe they'll have an interest in getting additional information on demand reduction and figuring out or understanding why demand reduction is linked to their initiatives to learn more about human trafficking and prevention of human trafficking.
What do you all see as next steps?
Nicole, it's Kelly Hodges with SBI. I wanted to thank you for the invitation to listen to this. As I get my feet wet, I am on a daily basis being consumed with new information at a high rate. I do want to mention to you guys that I had a unique experience meeting the co-founder of a website called preventionnow.com, and I encourage you to take a look at it. I went and met the co-founders are the previous director of NCIS and someone from FBI. They are strategically placing people all over the country, and it's going to be very much data driven and seeing what they can offer to other nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and seeing what the data actually looks like so that we can do the educational piece to say, in North Carolina, these are who your victims are likely to be. So this is where you should focus your efforts. And quite frankly, from you and I talking briefly, the data piece is really puzzling to me, and it's the frustrating part to some of the things that we will be combating, standing up the human trafficking unit. But I would encourage you, they're getting their feet underneath them, but I think that they have some things that all of us could utilize them for in the future.
Kelly, I missed the last sentence that you said.
Sorry, Nicole. I just said I think that they're a likely partner that could benefit a lot of other nonprofit organizations as well as us as law enforcement. They're not particularly a source to just government agencies or a source just to the service providers, but I think that what they're doing is very innovative, and it's more proactive than it is reactive. And so I'm looking forward to having some conversations with them in the future. And I think that, I don't know what part didn't get relayed, but you know, they're basically looking at trying to assist not targeting, but saying in North Carolina what our likely victims are, who is that person, what is that demographic, what does that victimology look like, so that we know the right places to focus our educational piece.
Thank you so much. Did anybody have thoughts on the technology? The technology to me is potentially a game changer because it increases the capacity so much. It's inexpensive, it can be launched over a large geographical area. Was there anybody that wanted more information on that or interested in launching something similar?
think people might need some time to process. But something that we had wondered and would like to get your input on. We wondered if some of you might find it helpful to get together and to sort of think about what a coordinated strategy might look like in North Carolina. To have an in-person meeting with anyone from this group who would be interested in participating. And as was indicated in the survey, we feel sure that there are people that are agencies or organizations that we simply didn't think about, maybe don't know about, that you all would suggest that we get everyone together and really dream and think about what our next steps might be, and to make sure that it is a coordinated strategy. As Nicole mentioned, there are groups out there who might want to do demand reduction and with the very best of intentions, but just imagine that if we have a statewide coordinated strategy, how much bigger the impact could be if we're all working together towards some common goals. So would some of you all be interested in a gathering like that, where we get together and begin to, okay, now we've kind of assimilated some information, we've had a little bit of time to process, and be aware, of course, that we are continuing to accumulate information. We have some folks doing research on like all those policies that I just ran through so quickly. What are some of the, what is the evidence in terms of effectiveness and recidivism on some of those other things? And I love the technology piece, but I think we can probably all agree that's not the only thing we need to do. So there are other, what are the different pieces that we need to implement, and what would a timeline look like, and who do we need to get involved, that kind of thing. Would y'all be interested in getting together and dreaming with us what that might look like? Christine Long from the Human Trafficking Commission says they're always glad to be a part of these discussions.
Well, we are right at our time, so I want to respect everybody's time. We're getting some more messages. Thank you all so much for sharing your expertise and your contact information, and we will definitely be following back up with another gathering invitation to invite more people to the table, because we'd really, as Pam said, like to dream together and start putting pen to paper and coming up with some strategies that would work for our area, and maybe piloting some of these in North Carolina. So unless there are any other questions, we will adjourn. But if you have any questions at all, or any follow-up comments or concerns or light bulb moments, please don't hesitate to reach back out to us.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks.